First, though, General Motors and the debt crisis. Congressman Paul Ryan is standing by on the phone to talk about both of these things. Welcome, Congressman. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, good morning, Vicki. How you doing today?
I'm doing well as can be expected. We've given the lousy and serious news coming off the weekend, but it's very nice, and so I'm enjoying the idea of going back and toiling with my perennials. But I'm a geek. All right, well.
I did my share of my honey-do list. That was what my wife wanted for Mother's Day. It was basically a whole list of chores. So I was out doing the same kind of thing.
I just don't have anyone to pass off the list to. Well, let's start with General Motors, and then we'll wrap up with the debt crisis, because I'd like to leave people with some thoughts on this very, very serious issue. However, General Motors, to not frustration, but to the rage of folks, watching the story and seeing those television commercials.
I know.
They justifiably said, how dare they? And then when it came out less than 24 hours later that, in fact, what appears to have happened is General Motors used one TARP fund to pay back another TARP fund.
Right.
They're demanding some accountability here.
And that's exactly what I sent a letter to Tim Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, on this amount, which was those ads are misleading, but also the administration, was coming out with this sort of PR offensive that gave you the impression that GM is free and clear. And so the point is just what you made. They took one slug of money, $6.7 billion from one bailout fund to pay off that loan. We are still deep into GM. The taxpayer still owns the majority of GM. We don't even have a real valuation of this company because they haven't given us transparent metrics on how much GM is worth. So we really still don't know the taxpayer exposure to it, but we know we're $30 to $50 billion into GM as taxpayers. So the idea that this is free and clear, that the taxpayer's off the hook and they're on their own, is just not true. And so to me, it was just frustrating to see all the things that have happened to people in Janesville, to plants across the country, with all of this TARP and bailout, and to give this impression that they're free and clear. It's just misleading, and that's why I wanted to get some straight accounting. We're still waiting for the answers. We have yet to receive them.
We don't know what the valuation of the company is?
That's right. So we've actually, on behalf of the Congressional Budget Office, tried to get the kinds of metrics you need from the Treasury Department, which is basically the owner and banker of GM on behalf of the taxpayers, so that the CBO can give us a real estimate as to, what kind of exposure we have here, and we can't get those numbers from the Treasury Department.
So it could be anywhere from $30 to $50 billion.
That's our back-of-the-envelope estimate.
Hey, but you know what? What's a few billion? It's walking around money for the administration. What is the percentage that the United States taxpayer owns of GM, or the government owns of GM?
Well, the government's own, it's about 80%. You got to remember the Canadians are involved in this too, and then the unions have a big chunk of ownership as well. And so, we're looking into I think the U.S. taxpayer, off the top of my head, it's about 60%, but I'm just doing this off the top of my head.
Right. So that's what we thought. It was about 60%. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still waiting. Is there any way to compel that information if the information is not forthcoming?
Well, actually, no. I mean, that's the whole point, which is the Treasury Department can sit on it, and they basically say that you will never know until you do an IPO, but we can do pre-IPO evaluations. That happens in the publicly traded market every single day, and that's the kind of information that the Congressional Budget Office has been trying to get, so we can sort of estimate what kind of taxpayer exposure we're looking at, and if there's ever even a decent likelihood that we ever get our money back. I'm very suspicious that we will ever get our money back as taxpayers and be fully paid for this. We're getting TARP money paid back by banks. The banks have paid all their money back. It's when TARP went beyond the banking sector where we're losing all of this money, to the auto companies, to these housing programs. Those are the things that Treasury did in it exercising its own discretion, with the guidance of the president, that has caused us to lose all this TARP money.
Can you explain to people why why can't we force the Treasury Department to give us this accounting? I mean, you're saying CBO. We thought CBO had the authority to demand the information. Why is this information we can't demand?
Well, first of all, CBO works for Congress, not the executive branch. And so the executive branch is in possession of this kind of data. They are now a private company. They're not publicly traded, and therefore private companies do not have to disclose these kinds of numbers. Take a look at, say, SC Johnson Wax over in Racine. That's a private company. It doesn't have to disclose those numbers because they're not publicly traded. And so they still have not given us kind of data that they even give the SEC. And so that's why they're hiding behind this sort of privately held company, even though it's the government that is the private owner of this company.
Yeah, even though we, the taxpayers.
Right, exactly.
We don't even know what we don't know what we own. Okay.
Right.
Let's talk about some new and very disturbing information that just was released over the weekend. One says in a worst case scenario, this is, best case scenario compared to worst case scenario, 18% of tax revenue will be paying off interest on our debt by 2018. Best case scenario, 22% of our tax revenue is paying off the interest on our debt by 2013. Worst case scenario. And folks are wondering, given that massive amount of revenue going to our debt, what makes us so immune from the crisis that's happening in Europe right now?
We're not. It's just a matter of time. If we stay in the path we're on, we will have the same kind of debt crisis. All the numbers are screaming to that effect. Look, if interest rates stay low where they are right now, those are the numbers you're talking about. If interest rates rise, which inevitably every economist believes that they will, we're going to have trillions more going out the door. We will, by the end of this budget window, that the budget we're living under, have about 90% of our debt will be the size of our economy, meaning 90% of GDP will be the size of our national debt. When you get a debt that is that big, that is when the economy starts stagnating, like in Europe. When you have interest payments that quintuple over the next decade, which is what they're projected to do now, go from $200 billion a year to about $1 trillion a year, that's the path we're on already right now. I would argue they're going to get worse because of right now the government is predicting low interest rates for the foreseeable future into the decade. That's off by about $5.4 trillion from our numbers that CBO has given us. The point basically is this, Vicki. We are not where Europe is right now, but we are on the path to going down the same path. And that's the problem. Once we go down that path, there's nobody to bail us out. You've got the IMF and Germany and France that are basically bailing out Greece, but we are the world's reserve currency. Nobody is here to bail out America. And if we go down this same path, it will not only give us a problem for our own reckoning, but it will turn upside down the global financial system. I mean, if this contagion can spread from Greece to Portugal, Spain, and Italy, it can just as easily over time spread to us, and that's why we got to get our fiscal house in order. And the answer is not to throw a new VAT tax on top. The answer is not to try and raise taxes to simply delay the day of reckoning, because what the numbers show you is if you actually try to tax your way out of this problem, you literally can't do it. You'll kill the economy, so we shouldn't even try in the first place. Spending is the problem. Spending is what we have to do, and if we take on our spending problems now, we can do it in a methodical, gradual way. We can do it where people have time to prepare and reorganize their lives. My generation, your generation, the X generation, we know that these programs won't be there for us when we retire as they're currently designed. But if we act now, we can guarantee that they're going to be there for people who are in and near retirement. That's the smart thing to do, but unfortunately, the government's not doing that. We just created a new entitlement, and we're spending more and more money unlike we've ever done before. Stimulus is $1 trillion in borrowing. And so the problem is the credit markets are looking at America, and they're saying, oh, my gosh, these guys are going down the same path as Europe. They're not learning the lessons.
Well, I think what people... I think people don't understand how government could be so disinterested in seeing this writing on the wall. I mean, I don't know how many people have come up to me and said, you know what, we could be Greece. We could be Greece. They're having an austerity crisis. Now people are rioting because they're not getting their government handout. We're not that far away from Greece. And maybe we are, quite a bit of a distance away from Greece, but a lot of folks are wondering, good grief, the writing's on the wall. It's screaming 90% of GDP would be our debt. What if it's higher? At what point does the economy flip upside down and we are all, wondering if we'll ever get government cheese?
And that's exactly right. So the other thing I think is important to note, which is what you mentioned, is people living off the government, more takers than makers in society. And we're going down that path as well. And that's what I call the tipping point. A lot of different statistics that are out there. You could use the current one that 47% of people don't pay income taxes today. You could use the Tax Foundation data that 60% of Americans get more money from the government than they pay back in federal taxes. The point is we're on this trajectory where we're going to have more people taking from government than living on their own, paying taxes, contributing to it. That is a dangerous position to be in. That's the position Greece is in, and we don't want to go down that path because we know that this country is unique and exceptional because we are a self-determining culture. Our system is organized around the idea that we as individuals want to make the most of our lives. We have a safety net to help people who can't help themselves, who are down on luck, but we don't have a welfare state. And so basically the real issue here, Vicki, and the debt question just simply tells you we've got to make a decision in this country. Do we want to have a safety net or do we want to have a welfare state? Do you want to have an opportunity society with a safety net underneath it, or do you want to have a cradle-to-grave welfare state, which will inevitably mean slower economic growth, lower horizons for opportunity, and a much, much higher tax burden that means more and more of your earnings go to government than they go to yourself?
I got to say, it's actually, we are the reason, the existence of the United States and free market economies are the reason why welfare states are allowed to exist. If the United States becomes a welfare state, then it's worse than just slow growth. It's rampant poverty. I mean, it's miserable. And I don't think people are appreciating what life would be like miserable. Not, wondering where you're going to be able to get shelter, where you're wondering where you're going to be able to get food for a fair number of folks, because at some point the United States works its way through all of the money available. Then what do we do?
Well, again, look, we already know we're giving the next generation a lower standard of living based on the path we're on. That's not a Paul Ryan statistic. That's the Congressional Budget Office. Right. That's the General Accountability Office. That's any fiscal estimate tells you next generation is going to have a lower standard of living if we stay on the path we are on. We know that to be true, and so it obviously speaks to reason. Let's fix this and prevent that from happening. The question is whether or not we have the kind of political paralysis to do that or not. I mean, do we have the great leadership in Washington? Absolutely not is the answer, in my opinion. The leadership in Washington and in Madison right now is heading us in the other direction. They're basically content with the idea that we will be a welfare state, that we'll just have to raise taxes more to afford all of this, and then government goes in the position of simply managing our national decline. And I would simply argue that we have to get the right leadership in place in Washington, in Madison, and reclaim those principles that built this country: liberty, freedom, free enterprise, self-determination, government by consent of the governed. Those are the ideas and the principles that made us so unique, so special, and so prosperous. And we have to take those and apply them to the problems of the time, and we can fix this. And that's the great point I'm trying to make, which is it's not all over with. It's not all doom and gloom, put your head in the sand. If we do this, if we turn these things around, I've been able to put this bill out there, the roadmap that the Congressional Budget Office tells you, you can turn the prosperity machine back on in America. You can fulfill the promises you're making to current generations of retirees, and you can have a prosperous, growing, dynamic economy that gives us higher standards of living in the future. And so we know what we need to do. We know we can do it. We know it's still achievable. We just got to get the right political leadership in place to do it, and that's basically my point.
Well, and I think maybe a change in November. A lot of folks are expecting a massive change in November. Maybe that's a pathway. Maybe that is the way forward to some more common sense, because you were the one that did the calculation on the actual cost of stimulus, simply because it provides for existing programs to be continued on in perpetuity. It's over $3 trillion. We just got a new unemployment rate that was higher than the last unemployment rate. College students are graduating into a job market that doesn't exist. We have got, the only thing we hear from Washington is trying to figure out ways to either lay a carbon tax down on us or manipulate us into a VAT. And what we don't have in terms of the administration is any kind of idea to the future. I'm hoping that maybe some of your Democrat colleagues in Congress might be a little bit more open-minded to your idea come November.
Well, and I think people are realizing the point, which is if we want to get jobs in the economy right now, which is job number one for those of us who are serving, the medium and long-term fiscal trajectory of the country matters a lot. If it looks like we're going to have our own debt crisis, if we see nothing but higher taxes, higher interest rates in the future, you're much less likely to start a new business, to invest in a business, to create jobs. So if you get the fiscal thing fixed in the medium and long term, you're helping jobs right now. If we show that we're getting our spending in line, that we're living within our means, that we're doing what we need to prevent these big tax increases, that we're not going to borrow our way out of this debt hole, which gives us higher interest rates, then that is the best thing we can do right now to get jobs in the economy today, to get businesses back in business, to get credit flowing in this country so those small businesses actually can have the capital and the confidence to go and hire people. And so that's the whole point. It all relates to each other. The long term and the short term are one and the same. fiscal discipline, fiscal responsibility, get government to live within its means, and do the things you need to do to keep our entrepreneurial economy flourishing again and turn that American economic engine back on.
Where's the budget right now, Paul?
Well, I don't think they're going to do one. I keep talking to my counterpart, John Spratt, the chairman of the Budget Committee, who keeps kind of pushing us off, meaning he's never saying we're not going to do it, but maybe next week, maybe next week. It looks clear to me that they're not going to do a budget. I'd be shocked if they do, this being the Democrats, because I don't think they can pass it. The budget they have doubles the debt in 5 years, triples it in 10 years, and has about a $1.8 trillion tax increase in it. And so I don't think they feel they can pass this on the eve of an election cycle. So what they'll do in light of budgeting is what we call deeming. They will deem the number to the Appropriations Committee to pay for funding all the government agency budgets. That's called discretionary spending. And so my guess is they'll just pass a resolution to allow the spending to occur in government today for government agencies and then call it a day.
So there's you're telling me that there's absolutely nothing in the hopper right now, save the roadmap, because we know that the Senate is working on cap and trade, and the Senate is working potentially on comprehensive immigration reform. They're not working on anything to try to get our arms around, America, slouching toward Greece, essentially. And we just got new tax numbers coming back that said April, for the second year in a row, actually has lower tax collections, which is is a sign that our recovery, there isn't a recovery to speak of when it comes to the average American appreciating what recovery means here. So you're basically telling me the Democrats in the House want to do nothing except spend. The Senate Democrats want to do nothing except spend more. And the rest of us are just sort of, left, praying?
And so I think one of the biggest threats for our economy now, not unlike the housing bubble where we had, the subprime mortgages, we had, all of the credit problems that occurred there. I think the new problem is sovereign debt. And that is we have all of these governments borrowing on a binge, whether it's state governments in America, the federal government, or these European governments, Japan as well. And the market is flooded with all this government debt. And there's becoming a crisis of confidence that the governments can actually repay all of that debt. If these debts get restructured, which I think is inevitable, especially in Europe, that will reduce the value of those debts on the banks, and we'll have another banking crisis. We will have another kind of a credit problem in the world economy because of sovereign debt and overspending and overtaxing. That's going to be a problem, I think, that's going to kind of resemble the housing bubble problem we had before. And so that is why it's so important to regain confidence that government, U.S. government, state governments, other foreign governments are getting their fiscal house in order. And throwing new taxes on top doesn't do that. You have to attack the nature of spending. And if we all do that, then we can prevent that kind of a credit crisis from occurring as well. So I really worry that we're getting the medium, long, and short-term wrong, which is going to make it harder for us to get this economy growing.
Let me ask you something. A lot of folks are speculating whether in the lame duck session, that's when they're going to try to put a VAT in place. Is that something that you have heard chattering about?
I don't think that's going to happen. I'm on the Fiscal Commission, the President's Commission. That's where those rumors come from. 6 of us on that commission are elected Republicans. They would have to get 2 of us to support something like that in order for that kind of a recommendation to even make it to the floor of Congress in the lame duck session of Congress. Obviously, you know me, I don't support something like that. I don't think the commission has the votes to do some new big VAT tax. I don't think that's going to happen. The question is, does the commission have the votes to do real spending control and discipline? And I just don't know the answer to that yet. We just started meeting.
All right. Last question. Can't you guys just free spending at last year's levels?
Well, you have to have control in Congress to do that. If we were
is that the Democrats could propose instead of doing a budget, we're just going to... Yes.
They could do that, but I have no indication that tells me they're planning on doing that. If anything, they're negotiating how much will they increase spending. That's what's going on right now.
It's not funny. It's just you almost can't process all of this. It really, you can't imagine the government so disinterested in what's going on. And the average rank and file American wondering whether there will be a retirement for them, whether there will even be a job available for them. Never mind if you just got out of college over the weekend and you're wondering, is my life going to be a minimum wage job for the next 10 years or so? It's unfathomable that Congress is so unplugged from what's going on in the real world.
It is, but I just want to end with a dose of optimism. It is not too late to turn this around and get this right. It is not too late to get the American idea revived and get our economy headed in the right direction. We can get this debt and deficit under control if we act soon. And that's the good news, which is we still have a choice. Do we want the American idea or do we want the welfare state? It is still something we can choose. Now, in a handful of years, 5 or 6 years, we probably won't have the luxury of that choice if we make the wrong decisions between now and then.
And we've got elections coming up as well, and that could help. That could help the probability of a choice increase if you can get members of Congress to sign on. I mean, the roadmap it's one idea, but it's an idea the CBO said would actually get our debt under control.
Right.
And, you have been very open to say, Democrats, feel free to offer up your own ideas here that would do the same thing. We're still not having the conversation. You're the one that's still talking about this, not Congress generally. So I'm hoping you've got some friends coming up in November.
Point, they always tell you, don't touch these things, don't go offer these kinds of spending reforms. It's the third rail of politics. My hope with my effort is to try and make the third rail of politics failure to tackle this fiscal problem, because if we don't tackle it, it's going to tackle us, Vicki. I got to tell you that. And yes, I've been disappointed in both political parties in their willingness or ability to offer up a fix to this. I mean, that's why I put it out there. I think if people are going to give me this job and I'm going to go work for them, I think they want you to go fix the problems that are right in front of us. And this debt and fiscal problem is the biggest one threatening our future as a country and as a standard of living for each of us and our families.
I think, oddly, the reports coming out of Greece and coming out of Europe are maybe even helping folks understand that. So I don't want to cheer on anybody's demise, but it does tend to focus one's attention very, very sharply on our own situation and our own problems. In fact, people are starting to talk about California kind of being a harbinger of what could happen in the overall U.S. economy. So,
if you're into this issue, go to watch the CDS-OIS spreads. That's a technical thing, but you basically watch the debt default risk of default spreads. Go to California, go to Illinois, New Jersey, and New York, and those are the states you keep your eye on these days.
All right, well, best of luck to you, whatever we can do to help you. But I think right now what folks need to do is I think they need to start getting on Republicans and saying, look, this is not something you can kick the can on either. And it can't just be Congressman Paul Ryan being the only one talking about this. So I know you've got some friends out there who are talking about this. Not enough, Congressman. That's the problem. So thank you so much for your time. And actually,
have a good one.
A little bit more optimistic after talking to you, because I know that there are some ideas that are out there. But right now, guys, wow, you've just got people who either deliberately aren't watching what's going on or they're pretending it can't happen to us. But it can, and it could very, very soon. Not even 20 years from now, where it's easy to ignore, but maybe 5 years from now. Congressman Paul Ryan, always a pleasure to have Congressman Paul Ryan on.